In 1969, protests led by a coalition of minority students at the University of California, Berkeley pushed the university to break barriers in education with the creation of an ethnic studies department. Strikes led by the student organization Third World Liberation Front protested the white, Eurocentric curriculum being taught throughout California and the nation. The strikes in California started a national discussion on how we educate. Young students across the country began advocating for reform in public education. After World War II, America's economy boomed and the expansion of the middle class allowed for more high school graduates to attend college. The Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, commonly known as the GI Bill, paid for veterans to attend public universities for free, creating further incentive for people to attend college. But for many minority students, college was not an option due to barriers in education such as the lack of funding in majority-minority high schools and the racial bias in the college application process. Minority students who did attend universities were met with curriculums that emphasized the history of European white males, leaving the histories of minority students underrepresented. In the 1960s, some universities were starting to address how to make their schools more diverse and equitable. In 1964, the University of California, Berkeley instituted its Education Opportunity Program to make the school more accessible, in part by soliciting students at local community colleges. By 1968, minority enrollment at universities nationwide was at an all-time high. Throughout the late 1960s at neighboring Bay Area school, San Francisco State College, tensions between administrators and students had been rising. 6 Black student union members were arrested after a conflict with a reporter, and a graduate student was suspended for political activism, including his role as the Minister of Education for the Black Panther Party. In February of 1968, the newly appointed president of the college handed in his resignation due to student pressure. Minority student activists united under the banner Third World Liberation Front to create a diverse alliance fighting for representation. This coalition included major campus activism groups such as the Black Student Union, the Asian American Political Alliance, the Mexican American Student Confederation, and the Native American Student Union. These students felt that the white, Eurocentric education being taught only fueled racism because of ignorance, unworthiness because of race or gender, and lowered self-worth and performance for students who did not feel represented. After the formation of the Third World Liberation Front at neighboring SF State, Berkeley students came together under the same banner, creating a strong coalition. Following the lead of the SF State activists, UC Berkeley's Third World Liberation Front went on strike with the goal of creating a third world college that would teach ethnic studies classes such as African American history, Chicano literature, and Asian American studies. Strike leaders sent out a list of demands to the university's board of directors, primarily demanding the creation of a third world college with minorities in positions of power. Tensions on campus grew strained as more students left classes to join marches and on-campus demonstrations. California's Governor Ronald Reagan opposed the students' political power and, as promised in his election campaign, tried to suppress the strikers by declaring a state of emergency.
All of it began the first time some of you who know better and are old enough to know better let young people think that they had the right to choose the laws they would obey as long as they were doing it in the name of social protest.
The National Guard was deployed, escalating the violence on campus. At the start of second semester 1969, the strikes had grown, and the Third World Liberation Front was occupying much of campus. After 10 weeks of conflict, administrators finally agreed to negotiate with the strikers. By March, compromises between protest leaders and administrators resulted in the creation of an ethnic studies department, with negotiations for a third world college pending. The vote to establish this department was an overwhelming 550 to 4. The strikes at UC Berkeley broke barriers in education with the establishment of an ethnic studies department that elevated the voices of minorities in higher education.
I think it's really important that we have ethnic studies scholarship that is created by people who have the lived experiences of whatever situation, of whatever culture, of whatever historical moment we're talking about, and that is the primary scholarship that we're drawing from.
In the decade following the creation of the UC Berkeley Ethnic Studies Department, students impacted by the example of the Third World Liberation Front strikers realized that change in their universities was possible. Protests in support of creating ethnic studies departments and hiring more professors of color that began in California spread across the nation. In the late 1970s, Bowling Green State University in Ohio formed an ethnic studies center in response to the student demands. Within the next few years, Bowling Green was offering a full spectrum of ethnic studies classes. The establishment of ethnic studies across the nation resulted in the expansion of America's curriculum. In 1981, after teaching in California's public schools, Rodolfo Acuna published Occupied America, A History of Chicanos, a textbook on Mexican-American history. By 1993, there were more than 700 ethnic studies programs in universities across the nation. The barriers in education that the Third World strikers broke led to more inclusive curriculums. Today, a rising number of public school administrators and high school students started discussions around ethnic study requirements in secondary education. Vermont and Oregon have enacted laws requiring ethnic studies be taught in elementary and high schools, and many states such as California have proposed laws that would make ethnic studies a high school graduation requirement. In 2013, only 1% of public school students in California had access to ethnic studies courses. However, about 71% of students in the 60 biggest public school districts in the U.S. are Latinx or Black. In 2010, Arizona enacted a ban on Mexican American studies in the Tucson School District, stating that the program and content was too controversial. Students and teachers protested, and the ban was ruled unconstitutional, bringing attention to the importance of ethnic studies for all students. Across the country, high school students are taking steps to create systematic change. The Third World Liberation Front strikes broke barriers in education by inspiring generations of minority students to stand up for their histories.
There's lots of lessons that can be gotten, but I would say that was just the beginning, And it's up to each generation to consider what's relevant and important and to continue developing it.
The Third World Liberation Front strikes of 1969 broke barriers in education when the University of California, Berkeley met the demands of student strikers, resulting in the creation of an ethnic studies department. The strikes in California impacted the nation by becoming the starting point for students elsewhere to demand minority representation in education. Today, students are following the example of the Third World Liberation Front and are advocating for required ethnic studies classes in high schools across the country. The strikes at UC Berkeley inspired students to fight for an inclusive, equitable education system representing all.